Welcome up! In this episode we will talk about Plato and his theories of ideal politics, coming up. Hello, I'm Understanding Politics, and in this channel I explain political theories and debates to students as well as curious and passionate people, just like you. I've structured this lecture in 4 macro sections. There will be a short introduction, then in the second one we will explain the Republic, in the third the Statesman, and in the last one we will talk a bit of how to interpret Plato. Let's dive into it. Plato was a disciple of Socrates. As such, his philosophy is a direct continuation of what Socrates was professing. Particularly, Plato focused on the truth as an idea that needed an actualization beyond opinions and judgments that, on the other hand, constantly change and shift. As for Socrates, Plato thought of the politician as someone fundamentally different from the sophist, as there is a difference between science and rhetoric. The myth of the cave is the best example of how people betray themselves by focusing on the shadows instead of the things projecting. The Republic is composed of 10 books revised many times by Plato over the years. By the way, that is not the original title of the book we are discussing, because if you saw my previous videos, you know that ancient Greeks did not have such a word. The Republic of Plato is actually politeia, the whole system of things regarding the polis. Yet, for the sake of simplicity, we will stick to the classic translation of the title, meaning the Republic. As for the rest of Plato's books, this is a dialogue between Socrates and other characters. The beginning of the discussion revolves around justice. It is in fact a continuation of the debates that we have assisted to in the Gorgias. Socrates faces a sophist, Thrasymachus, who argues that universal justice does not exist. Rather, justice is determined as specific will of those in power. Once again, the conviction of Socrates, Plato, revolves around the scientific dimension of politics and in the awareness of what is good. If a politician knows the good, then in doing politics he will not realize that partial justice that Thrasymachus is referring to. The problem of politics is, hence, ignorance of the principles on which this science works. The goal of Plato in the Republic is precisely to explain the principles on which politics is founded. In an analogy, Plato compares the state to the human body. This organicist metaphor will be very popular throughout the years as it implies efficiency and functioning. According to Plato, communities are created because individuals are not able to survive relying solely on their strength. Unlike many philosophers in the future, though, Plato does not care for families. He is thinking about work communities: farmers, traders, soldiers, philosophers, and politicians. He divided them in 3 groups. The first involves the producers, traders and farmers, the second group is made by warriors, and the third one involves rulers, politicians. At the same time, Plato is convinced that each one of us propends for or excels in one of these activities. According to Plato, a major problem of society consists in the fact that some people end up serving in groups where they should have not served. Warriors serving as politicians, for example. This is what generates ignorance and the implementation of inefficient policies. For Plato, all of this can be avoided through the elimination of 2 major institutions in societies: family and property. On the one hand, families force individuals to serve in groups even when they are not made for that kind of life because of prestige, wealth, and so on. Similarly, property is what sets poor and rich people apart. By neutralizing these 2 institutions, the communism devised by Plato will realize a society based upon justice. You see where socialists have drawn most of their ideas over time, right? The state will educate children to become citizens in a real paideia, untouched by the prejudices of families and the temptation of wealth. Philosophy will then become the supreme form of knowledge. If you're surprised by this conception, go back to the first video of the series and you will realize that most of these propositions are founding elements of the Spartan political system. Justice in the state is realized when people grown to exercise a certain function limit their activity to that simple function. These 3 functions, meaning producing, defending, and governing, are mirrored by 3 different souls: desire, strength, and rationality. The political analysis of Plato then becomes almost prophetical when he explains the different phases of evolution or decay in the government of polis. Plato was somehow convinced that eventually rationality always prevails over rationality and that each form of government is representative of a different character of man. According to Plato, the best form of government is aristocracy, where rulers, philosophers, are governing the polis using rationality. Even more than that, Plato further endorses monarchy realized by a sole king philosopher. The first sign of decay is shown in the transition from aristocracy to democracy. Democracies are based around strength, and that's the case of polis ruled by warriors. There is then the case of oligarchies, where rulers are wealthy people. Once again, this is an evident sign of decay, as for Plato, property is not something it should be there in the first place. Then it comes democracy, the rule of the poor people with the exclusion of wealthy ones. Finally, there is tyranny, which I believe does not require further explanations, which is the worst form of government. In this process, politics stops being science to decrease down to rhetoric. The target of Plato are specifically democracy and tyranny as the problematic forms of government where the absolute desire of liberty is so unrestrained that it ends up harming science. Democracy is a death sentence for rationalities, for Socrates. The Republic is then concluded with a discussion on the immortality of the soul and reincarnation. There is a different dialogue where Plato discusses the act of doing politics. If in the Republic he discussed politics at the theoretical level, here he describes the activity itself, meaning what the king philosopher must do in his daily work. In this sense, Plato compares the work of the ruler to that of the architect. They both realize a project that will be executed by those serving him, their functionaries. At the same time, as in architecture, the best projects are those realized with the right proportions and a sense of measure. In debating laws, Plato concedes less than Socrates. Laws are generally a good tool, but their blind use can lead to negative outcomes. As a matter of fact, laws cannot foresee everything that happens in the developments of the polis. The real king philosopher is the one that can see when laws realize justice and when they should be amended to reflect the spirit of times. Finally, he comes back to the analysis of different forms of government to argue that the real discriminatory element is whether these systems try to conform to the art of government or not. Also, a democracy where politics and not rhetoric is practiced can be good. The only real problematic form of government at its start is tyranny because it implies a form of government without justice. Can we say that Plato was leftist? Short answer, no. The whole idea of left was invented just in the 19th century. Although we can say for sure that Rousseau and Marx were inspired by Plato. The idea that rationality should be imposed on masses, well, that's a rather authoritarian take that justified most of the despotic dictatorships from the 19th century onwards. Plato is fundamentally a snob that believes that there is no place for arrogant people who believe to understand things that they don't understand at all. He believes that ignorance is the worst problem, but everyone is potentially ignorant in most subjects. The philosopher Socrates sought truth aware of his ignorance. The abolition of property is another important element shared by Plato, Rousseau, and Marx. Still, you have always to consider the economy and the administration of the state as distinct elements. There can be a social economy without authoritarianism. It just implies more equality. At the same time, imposing more equality is often a policy not well received by the general population. You have to remember here the debate of Benjamin Constant on the liberty for the ancient and the moderns. I have a video about that if you like. In the 18th century, Rousseau was just reproposing the idea of liberty as intended in ancient Greece, and therefore Plato's position is to be understood as pretty standard for the time. On the other hand, our societies are more focused on individuals and less on collectives, implying that a type of liberty based on what the majority wants is not understood as real liberty by us, even if someone argues that the decision is rational. Here we are. Even today, the lecture is over. Thank you for watching.